Yeah, so coming from Virginia, that was 2 long flights, and I'm kind of cold to show that I really did travel by plane. You pick up everything. Anyway, this talk is primarily more for the layperson. People talk about cannabis. I think it's absolutely one of the most wonderful plants on the planet. I can't really think of a plant that is more beneficial, as a medicine, as a food, and just for the environment, all the products it can make. But anyway, it's like, so why is cannabis so good, et cetera? So today, just going to talk about why cannabis works and to introduce the endocannabinoid system. I'm a nurse, as Cedric said. The fact that I'm with Patients Out of Time, we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating healthcare professionals and the public. So the luck that I've had over the years, since 2000, we've put on clinical conferences, national clinical conferences, and I bring researchers from around the world. So I've had the pleasure of listening to researchers from around the world present their research, from practitioners present their results, and from patients. We have a real multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary conference, and they all come together. And I think it's unusual in that regard. The researchers come and they really get excited because they kind of feel, just how important their research is when they're seeing the patients who are desperate for healthcare professionals to believe them, to actually think about helping them get cannabis as opposed to turning them away. So again, I don't know that I need to review this for everybody, but when we think of cannabis as a plant, people know hemp. This has been as old as ever. I come from Virginia. In recent years, back in the day, farmers had to grow hemp. You had to grow it because they needed that crop. In fact, after the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, when that went away, farmers kind of weren't growing hemp anymore. We had the war. The ships needed rope. They need, whether it be the sails and this and that, but primarily the rope because it doesn't mold, it doesn't rot. Ships use hemp. So they actually had a film, Hemp for Victory, to teach the farmers how to grow it again. Anyway, I think Mara even alluded to that. By definition, it's low THC. That's how we define hemp. The problem is there's CBD in it, and a lot of people then think, oh, we can get the CBD from the hemp plant. And a lot of issues, primarily the main thing is, how is this plant grown? And hemp is not grown generally with the same precautions that medical cannabis would be, making sure that it's organically grown because people are going to consume it. But marijuana, we want people to just get rid of that term, and maybe some love the term and you want to stay with it. But it was created, it was a Mexican term, but it was created in post-Prohibition time, and we needed to get, Anslinger, the head of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, didn't have a job anymore. So he's looking around, how am I going to keep my cops if we're out there for drug people? Alcohol is not a bad thing. Well, marijuana, the Mexicans were using it. The blacks were smoking reefer. So they created a hysteria about marijuana, a new drug menace. That was a lot of the headlines back then. So anyway, the Tax Act got passed, and since then, cannabis has faded away. Then with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, it became literally forbidden. But we are stuck with this term marijuana, and when people look back, that's all they think of is the marijuana prohibition and forward. Cannabis plant has been with us forever, so that's what we really want to know, is people to remember that. What we've learned about cannabis over the years, as you can see on the slides, a lot of different things. When I first heard about it, I knew it was good for nausea and vomiting. That was in the 70s, and people heard, oh yeah, chemotherapy, try a little pot. The nurses knew to go put a towel by the doorway if the patients were going to medicate, or encourage them to go take a walk outside if they were strong enough to do it and go medicate. And for the most part, nurses looked the other way because we could see that it helped. We heard glaucoma, I had heard that. But it wasn't until I started looking at cannabis and the history of it that you find just kind of amazingly, how can this happen? All of these different uses that we see here. And then the fact that it's illegal. How can this plant, if it's got all these things, be illegal when the Institute of Medicine in 1999, they basically came out and said, did a big study looking at the evidence about cannabis. Is there medicine? And basically they said, yes, it does have medical value. It's not highly addicted. It's not a gateway drug. Patients should be able to use it right away. Cancer patients, AIDS patients, okay, you can smoke it, but we'd really like to see an alternative delivery. That was the Institute of Medicine in 1999. And once again, just like any other study, the government didn't like it, so it stayed in Schedule 1. But then along the way, we all discovered the fact that the federal government has a patent on cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. So you've got to ask yourselves, what do they know that we don't know? Why can they have a patent on it and recognize medical value and keep it in what we call Schedule 1? And for those who don't know about this Controlled Substance Act of 1970, all intoxicating type drugs are controlled by the DEA. And it kind of allows physicians, can you prescribe it or not? So the forbidden category, Schedule 1, you've got marijuana, you've got peyote, you've got LSD, you've got heroin. Schedule 2, you've got your opiates, your Vicodin, your fentanyl, your morphine. But you've also got methamphetamine. You've also got cocaine in Schedule 2 because they've acknowledged that there's medical use. But to be in Schedule 1, no medical use, no accepted medical use in treatment in the United States. Not safe for medical use and highly addictive. So you soon learn that it doesn't fit any of this. But anyway, I asked myself this. I think other clinicians who looked at me when I would talk to them about how cannabis can do it, you've got to ask yourself, how could a plant relieve pain and control nausea and vomiting and prevent seizures and treat Crohn's disease, decrease intraocular pressure for glaucoma patients, treat anxiety and depression, help heal head injuries, treat fibromyalgia, treat MS symptoms, prevent Alzheimer's, treat cancer, treat post-traumatic stress symptoms, help with autism, help kids with ADD or ADHD, and there's more. It's kind of impossible. Aspirin doesn't do this. It's an anti-inflammatory. People use it, okay, for that they'll use it, take a little aspirin before, maybe that's good to prevent heart attacks. They're limited. Antibiotics, we'll use them for certain bugs, but they can't kill all of the bugs. No medicine has ever been like this. And so it's been a little tough to explain it until we came about this. So it's really important that you know this and understand that it is still not taught in med schools. There's a few around the country that include information on this endogenous cannabinoid system, but nurses aren't taught in nursing school. It's just not general knowledge for healthcare professionals. And I'd encourage you to ask your own healthcare professional, do they know about the endocannabinoid system? It literally is probably the biggest discovery on the human body within the last century. So what is it? Endogenous meaning within the body. So we shorten that and call it the endocannabinoid system. You've all heard, if you can raise your hand, how many have heard of endorphins? See, we make chemicals just like morphine. And this is kind of where we're coming to with the endocannabinoid system. So it's literally an emerging new science that's going to talk about this signaling system. It's on the molecular basis. It's not something that we're going to see with our eyes. It's on the molecular basis, signaling that's going on within the cells of our body. And its whole purpose is to help keep us in balance and maintain homeostasis. We are always, bad weather, bad food, car accident, you name it. There are different stressors coming on in our lives at all times. And this is a system, again, without us knowing on the molecular level, it's just altering everything in our body and trying to keep things in balance. So it was in 1988 when they first found the receptor in the brain. And they found these receptors, as Mara was talking earlier about the lock and key thing, but it's a receptor where another molecule would be locked in with it, and once that happens, it can either block a reaction or start a reaction. So we call it the lock and key. But they found these receptors in the brain that THC, that cannabinoids from the cannabis plant could interact with this, and it was like, oh wow. It made the news, but really not that much news. And I know a lot of stoners heard it and they went, we're wired for pot, we knew it. And the scientists said, no, there's got to be something more. So 4 years later, 1992, in Israel, in Meshulam's lab, they found the first endogenous cannabinoid. They called it anandamide, which means bliss. So now we knew that we make a chemical just like in the cannabis plant. By 93, they found other receptors, and you see the names. The CB1 just means that it was the first cannabinoid receptors they found, so CB1 receptors primarily in the brain. Then they found some in the immune system, and they called them CB2 receptors. But by 1995, they found another cannabinoid. It's got a long name. The simple name is 2-AG, so now we know we made at least two. And then in 2000, more discoveries. They found receptors in the spinal cord. They found endocannabinoids trigger feeding in newborn mice. In fact, in that experiment, let me back up. In talking about the endocannabinoid system, it's literally present in all vertebrate animals. You kind of think it's in all animals except insects. So the zoo animals, for the most part, have an endocannabinoid system too. So they did this study with the endocannabinoids in mice because all mammals in breast milk, females, have cannabinoids. And the thought was, is there a role? Well, in the animal world, when those, when the anandamide or the endocannabinoids were blocked in the mouse milk, the babies died. They did another experiment and blocked it a day later, and the babies, the little mouse pups were, half of them died and half of them were about half the weight of a normal population. Kept it up, but if you blocked it by the third day, the pups had gotten enough and they survived. But this was just an inclination that this is really important to survival. What is it? It helps with the suckling. It must help somehow. Then they also found receptors in the lungs, and I think that opened the eyes to got an old medicine. Actually, I've got a slide of that, but they really did have cigarettes, asthma cigarettes in the old days, that Canadana, it was cannabis and belladonna, but they literally gave it for people to help with their asthma, open the airway in their lungs. So the receptors, they're basically, like I said, the CB1 primarily in the brain, CB2 primarily in the immune system, and you can think your GI tract, liver, spleen. And when you're thinking of this, again, molecular level, hard to see. Throughout the brain, more receptors for our cannabinoids than for other receptors in there. And not only very, very proliferative in there, but not in the brain stem. And that's one of those things that helps people understand why you're not going to overdose. You know, we worry, healthcare professionals, with the opioid epidemic, we're getting at least 78 suicides a day. I shouldn't say suicides, overdoses. I don't mean suicides. 78 overdoses a day. That's ridiculous. But once, as patients need more and more opiates, you get to very close to where the lethal level is, and it's not always on purpose, and it could be if they're mixing it with some other drug. But we're losing a lot of people, and it's because it sedates, and the brain stem shuts down the breathing and heart rate. So there are no cannabinoid receptors in the brain stem, which really explain why you're not going to see death from cannabis. These are just molecules, again, for those of you who have a chemistry background, et cetera, you might get interested in this. For a lot of us, it doesn't mean much, but what you want to see is there's a similar look to the chemicals that are found in there. These cannabinoids, you don't have a blood level, so at this point in time, we don't know how to go to your doctor and say, could you, do a blood test, tell me how my endocannabinoid system's doing? Am I up to par? Do I need a little refueling in some manner? Is there something I can do to improve it? We don't know that yet. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is by illness, we can kind of tell that it's not working well. But they are two neurotransmitters. It's looking that we can see it way back into, as I said, it was in mother's breast milk. It's looking, we can see cannabinoids in the embryo. So you're seeing it at 14 weeks gestation, baby in utero, that you can see cannabinoid receptors. At 20 weeks, they can see that there's receptor activity, that it's important in the formation of the brain development, et cetera. As I said, they're formed on demand, so there's no blood level, active blood level here. It also makes it difficult then when you're talking about impaired driving. They pass laws for medical cannabis. In some of the states, they're going to have a level, just like for the blood alcohol level we'll have for impairment. There's a lot of science that goes behind a blood alcohol level and how intoxicated a person is. Now, granted, everybody has different tolerances, and this person's point